My name is Corinne Herlihy. I'm the project director for NCTE, a co-sponsor of the conference. And I just wanted to say that when we were reaching out to states and districts last summer in preparation for the conference and our contribution to the human capital strand, one of the big things that came up was this. Obviously, the Common Core was lots of what people were talking about, but also this alignment issue was kind of in the back of folks' minds, and I think it's really moved to the front of people's minds, and I think we have a really nice presentation here to go through. So welcome to Creating Coherence, Common Core, State Standards, Teacher Evaluation, and Professional Learning. We are expecting a few more audience members, so, well, I won't make you move. Stay where you are. So just to give you a sense of what we're gonna go through, we're gonna start. I will give bios in a moment, but we are going to have a couple of presentations, and then there's going to be some interactive work toward the end that will be led by Megan. But and I'm going to introduce everyone at first, and then we'll go through. Lisa Town will be our first presenter. Lisa has more than 20 years of experience in education, holding positions in the public, nonprofit, and for-profit sectors. Working across and in policy, strategy, and research, and engaging the federal, state, and local levels on a broad range of K-12 issues. She is from Education First and has led several of their research and strategy efforts to improve Common Core implementation in states and districts, as well as develop tools and analyses to support effective grant making and manage the firm's research team of policy analysts. So this is Lisa. She will kick us off. And then, let's see, sorry. Lisa's going to give us a broad overview of issues related to Common Core implementation. I think she's going to talk a little bit about how different departments within agencies maybe could work together in that way. That was one thing that we identified. And then Sarah Barzee is going to speak a bit from her experience as the Chief Talent Officer at the Connecticut State Department of Education. In this role, she has oversight of the state's professional development policies, education recruitment initiatives, and leadership development efforts. And prior to this, her role here, Dr. Barzee was the Assistant Executive Director for the Capital Region Education Council, where she managed and implemented CREC's services to school districts, other agencies, and programs. Okay, great. And we're going to hear a little bit about the work that Connecticut is doing and also how they have worked with our final presenter. I got to flip over again. Megan Zeffran is the Senior Technical Assistant Consultant at the American Institutes for Research, AIR. Megan provides support and assistance to states and school districts on education quality topics focused on educator evaluation. And it's a lot. So if you have any questions about educator evaluation, I think you can cross anyone on the panel, but Megan is actively doing TA with states and districts on this work, and she'll be leading us through an exercise in a moment. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Hi. We're going to do that again. Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's good to see you. I know it's the first session after lunch. It's a tough one. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to, as Corinne said, kick us off with a little bit of an overview of Common Core generally, and then talk a little bit about the connections between Common Core and teacher evaluation at the state and local level. Just very quickly, Education First, where I work. We do a lot of work with states and districts around these issues. We work both in Common Core and teacher evaluation, so this notion of working in the space in between is something that we engage with quite a bit in the work that we do every day. Again, what I'm hoping to do today to provide this kind of overview for the rest of the panelists here, who are going to dig a little bit deeper with some tools and some concrete experience on the ground, is high-level orientation to what's going on in Common Core, how the Common Core and teacher evaluation connect and don't. P.S. Sometimes they don't. I know that was a big takeaway for you. I'm sure you didn't know that. And then at the end, I'm going to wrap up with a way to think about moving forward, a productive path forward. And a lot of those themes I'm sure that Megan and will all pick up going forward with the rest of the conversation. I'm going to start us off with some politics. You're a bunch of data strategists. You probably don't think about this too much. But guess what, folks? Common Core has become incredibly political. You've got a really interesting thing going on where you've got the strangest set of political bedfellows you could imagine. On the far right, you've got sort of Tea Party activists who are fairly established and well-funded in this area, who are talking about the Common Core as Obama Core. Right, really trying to have this be an election year issue. There are 39 governors who are up for re-election this fall, and it's not a coincidence that the Common Core politics are heating up now. And this is really kind of a fight for the core of the Republican Party. This is kind of at odds with the traditional kind of pro-business base of the Republican Party, so it's a big deal, and it's playing out mostly in state capitals across the country. Then you have a more emergent force, a small but vocal group on the far left, some parents and men who are mostly talking about testing issues, and then also the main teachers unions, who have been a very strong supporter of Common Core to date, are starting to back off a little bit as they're getting concerned about implementation quality and also the consequences of how Common Core tests are going to be used in teacher evaluation systems and the consequences that are tied to those. So this is all in the mix right now. And so what's happened when you've got very loud voices on either end of the political spectrum? You lose the signal for the noise. So right now, the debate is about federal overreach and a loss of local control. There's lots of conflating of standards and curriculum that's going on. You're getting an exaggeration of the role of Obama and race to the top in the Common Core standards. Corporate and private interests, and it's very interesting. In my home district of Portland Public Schools in Oregon, there was a school board resolution that talked about the very suspicious private interests behind the development of the Common Core. They were referring to the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. So this is a very interesting sort of slippery sense of what corporate and private actually means in this context, but it's a big deal. Testing backlash also. This is what I was talking about with a lot of the parents. And the unions as well. And then finally, data privacy. Yes, I just said data privacy. Y'all, you should pay attention to this, because you might say, hey, wait a minute, data is a state issue. This is, federal government isn't involved. You can't get the data anywhere else. Student longitudinal data systems have been around well before Common Core. And you might not know, but it is true that both PARC and Smarter Balance, the testing consortia, have privacy policies that state leaders approved that adhere to all state and federal law. However, 83 bills in 32 states in legislative sessions addressed some aspect of student data privacy in the last year. Should I repeat that? 83 bills in 32 states. So data privacy and data issues are getting totally caught up in the politics around Common Core and teacher evaluation. If you're probably following in Bloom, New York legislation prohibited the collection using that, and they just folded as a company as of today, I believe. And there was narrowly defeated legislation in Georgia that would have cut off teachers' access to student test data, not just some of the things that people were worried about, like biometrics and things that smack of scariness, but just how did they do on the state tests last year? And that was very narrowly defeated in Georgia. So politics are very real. So what happens when the debate is about this? It's not about college and career readiness and what that means and how important that is for kids in a global economy. We're not really talking about how to shift the system so that teachers and students have the support they need to meet these more rigorous expectations, right, for college and career. And finally, the point that is really the central idea in this session is how to make those systems shift in a way that's actually connected and reinforcing with other reform efforts on the ground, especially teacher evaluation and support systems. So teachers are rightly confused and concerned. Really, this ought to be fundamentally about teacher learning, right? Connecting all of this. And what we need to be thinking about is something I'll come to at the very end, is this need for collaboration, right? You're getting these silos that are playing out in state education systems and at the local level, where people who traditionally haven't talked, and probably should have been talking before all this, frankly, but really need to be talking now and aren't. And those are the big things that are really the signal that we should be caring about, but the politics is obscuring along the way. So meanwhile, back at the ranch and the SCAs and the LEAs, y'all and the people you're working with are actually trying to deal with the policy implementation issues that are at play here with Common Core, which are substantial. I do not nearly have enough time to go through all of it, right? Standards are set They are then sort of the linchpin. They're the sort of North Star for alignment of all the systems around it. I'm going to touch on just a couple, just to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that are going on that you all are working on in the policy and implementation space. First of all, very quickly, what are the standards? I couldn't get all the standards on some slides, so I'm going to put up what are called the instructional shifts. So sort of what's the big deal, like what's different about these standards as compared to most state standards that were previously on the books. Well, in English language arts, you've got building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. It doesn't require that no one reads novels anymore, as you might have heard. But there is a much stronger emphasis on nonfiction. There's also an emphasis on evidence from the text. Not a lot of, how do you feel about this, right? It's more about show me build an argument and bring in evidence from the text as you're doing that. And then complex text and academic language, really building that vocabulary piece across subjects and making that connection. Math, narrowing and deepening. It is my deep hope that we will no longer have math textbooks that are 56 chapters long. What the standards help us to do is actually to focus on some core things in each grade as kids build their mathematical proficiency over the course of the grades. Coherence, another notion I just referenced. That's actually, the math is actually connected as it's connected in the hierarchy of the discipline. Math actually has a hierarchy associated with it. Now the way the standards are set up, it follows that. And then the rigor. There's conceptual understanding, procedural skill and fluency, and applications that are built into all of that. So those are the main kind of shifts that are embedded in the standards themselves. So what does that mean? If standards are our North Star, that means the systems at states and local levels have to be aligned to that. So this means assessments, accountability for students, schools, teachers, right? It means teacher preparation, professional development. All the systems around have to be aligned to this. I'm going to pick two areas just quickly to show you a little bit of, sort of unpack a little bit what that looks like. I'm going to talk about assessments because I think it's probably the most important thing. And it also is caught up in this political context that I was talking about earlier. Right now, there are, as you probably know, the two main consortia of states that are developing Common Core aligned tests, PARCC and Smarter Balanced. You have the PARCC states there in orange, and Smarter Balanced states in orange, and the PARCC states in the dark blue. And then you sort of see all this mishmash of other stuff, because this state of play here nationally is kind of confusing now, right? So you see, for example, the lone green state, that's Alabama, down there. They have actually decided to use ACT Aspire, not a member of either consortia. You also have the darker of the solid blue are members of neither consortia that used to be members of PARCC that have pulled out. So there's lots of movement is the point of all of this about what the aligned assessments are going to look like in states. It looks different across states and it's very fluid. I just had to update this slide 2 days ago before I came here because where the states are in their membership with the consortia is changing so quickly. It was easy for states to sign up for the consortia 3 years ago, right? We don't have tests, we need the tests. They're not going to get implemented and it's not going to hit anything in terms of accountability until 2014-15. We're almost there now, right? But even so, that's next year and it's getting closer and people are feeling it, and that's why you're seeing some of the movement of people pulling out and the politics getting hotter. But what's interesting and what this map shows is that actually, folks, it's moving right now, as you're probably aware. PARCC and Smarter are pilot testing their tests right now. There are 1 million students in PARCC states and 3 million students in Smarter Balanced states that are taking the tests potentially today, right? March to June window. So this is happening. And what's also interesting, what the numbers say here that you probably can't read, is that states are doing that in different ways. So some states are actually having the pilot testing as an add-on to their current state tests. Some are doing a random selection within it, and some are actually replacing. So California, for example, is not administering its current state tests. They are just doing the Smarter Balanced field test. So it looks very different in states, and it's happening as we speak. I chose college placement as the second policy to highlight to you very briefly because it's one you might not have thought of, right? The Smarter Balance and the Park stuff, you're all nodding, you knew that, right? This one is a little bit different because previous to the Common Core and the aligned assessments, we had a situation where 2/3 of states did not have an agreed upon score on a bunch of tests that they administer to kids as they're heading into college on whether or not they're actually ready to enter credit-bearing classes, right? This is the remediation issue. So in other words, even different institutions within states have different standards about what it means to be ready to enter into an entry-level course in math or in English. Several researchers, and being masters of the obvious, have said that a common cut score could actually help smooth some of the disconnects that we currently have, right, between what a high school diploma signals right now, right, and what it means to actually be ready to go into college. Those things don't actually connect right now. Park and Smarter are actually working very diligently both in the testing development process and with their higher education partners in their states to try and develop a common understanding of this and make that link more direct. So the actual performance on the high school summative tests for both of these is actually going to mean that they are ready to go into the entry-level courses in their 2 and 4 year institutions. So it's a connection and a set of policy work that's going on that's very much under the radar, but really is, in my view, fairly revolutionary. You can actually say to a kid who comes out of a high school with a diploma, this actually means something as you enter into college. It means you're ready. So that's a lot of deep work, like I said, with higher ed partners in the states that are participating currently in the consortia work. So those are kind of two big things that are going on in states. I also wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what Common Core implementation is looking like at the district level. We know much less about this. I will not stand up and say to you that I know exactly what it looks like in all the districts across the country, but my Education First was involved in a report that just came out that looked at 4 case studies of districts that were ahead of the curve on implementing Common Core and went in and really studied what they were doing. And we wanted to just share with you a couple things that we learned from that work. First of all, what are the pain points, right? What are people really struggling with, even in these places where they're ahead of their peers? High quality instructional materials. Cannot overstate this enough. There just isn't good information out there about what good Common Core aligned instructional materials are. Plenty of publishers out there who will put their gold stamp and say Common Core aligned, but what that really means is very unclear to everyone, including teachers who are really trying hard to make this come to life in their classrooms. State and district assessments don't yet measure the standards. Herein lies the sequencing problem, right? So where this kind of bumps into teacher evaluation. You've got books, you've got tests on the books that don't align to the Common Core. You've got teachers who are told you're implementing, you got to teach to the standards. Oh, and by the way, those assessments that don't yet align to the standards are going to be used in your teacher evaluation scores. Huh? So there's this disconnect that's going on with the assessment sequencing. I have 5 minutes, I gotta get going. Advice and cautions, just a couple things I'll mention here, some lessons that came out of that work. Leadership at multiple levels was really important. Not only this notion of principals truly being the instructional leader and working with observations and rubrics that are aligned to the Common Core, but also instructional coaches in the places that are getting this right. They've really focused in on the role of the coach and having them be true experts in Common Core in their buildings. Aligned curriculum, again, it's not there, but it's a ton of work to get right. And then aligned professional development, of course, a big thing districts need to be worrying about. You want to know what this is? This is a jumbled mess. And that's kind of the point, right? Yes, I'm violating PowerPoint, norms here by putting too much on the slide. But the point actually is, like, if you actually just stepped back and said, what's going on between 2012 and 2015 with teacher evaluation, with Common Core implementation, with the assessment transition, it looks like this. And this is the generic version of it, folks, when people actually take it and go, okay, how am I going to apply this to Ohio? Or how am I going to apply this to Kentucky? It gets even messier. And so we're kind of coming up here in the middle area where all of a sudden these systems are starting to take hold and get closer and closer. And P.S., like I said before, those elections are coming up. So the pain points in this middle section where we're living are becoming really acute. I'll take my last 4 minutes and be constructive. So what do we do with all of this jumbled mess? The big idea I want to leave you with is let's follow through with some smart execution. A lot of the politics are suggesting that we throw everything out and start over. Not the answer. We have good ideas. We've got implementation issues to fix, and that's what we need to do. So we need to adjust and not abandon. We need to seize the opportunity that these standards actually hold for all kids, right? We actually have an opportunity here to help all kids meet the standards that they need to be successful in college and career. We also need to say out loud to people that it's a lot to handle. We need to just acknowledge that jumbled mess, right? It is hard for people. It's confusing for people. We need to just acknowledge that. And then go in and make the smart adjustments that we need to make so that we earn goodwill back and we get some breathing room necessary to actually do the hard work of fixing those implementation issues, because they're pesky and they're hard, but they're the work that needs to be done. And then once we get a sense of what that new set of adjustments need to look like, communication. Sarah Hayburn said, kicking us off, when talking about the Tennessee, that she really underestimated how important it was to communicate. So I wrote the word down 3 times to emphasize her point. Once you get something where you can say those things, acknowledge it's hard, say what you need to do, can't communicate enough, and do it in a coordinated way. I'm not going to be able to say much of anything about this, except to say that it's kind of 4 ideas of what that smart execution might look like in states and districts. So you're connecting the instructional materials and assessments with the core. You're connecting observation rubrics that are at the heart of teacher evaluation systems with the Common Core as a real leverage point for enabling better instruction. You're aligning time, people, technology, and money to the Common Core. So you got to talk budgets, you got to talk sequencing. You have to figure out how all of this connects and sequence it right. That matters a tremendous amount. And finally, you've got to focus and involve people on the ground. We can't do this to teachers. We've got to do it with them. And that takes time and planning. And it's a really important part of getting this smart execution right. I can't go through this now. I did want to just highlight for you, I think these materials, Corinne, you said are going to be available for folks. You can see that in these 4 integration areas that I'm pointing to as kind of the ideas for what smart execution can look like, there's a couple of examples of states that have practices and resources in place that actually do this. A little shout out to our host state of Massachusetts here for having some really good resources available around this notion of alignment. And I will end with a focus on that piece, this notion of aligning time, people, technology, and money, with this idea that Corinne queued up for us about kind of how this is playing out in SCAs and LEA offices across the country, where there are some silos. So how are some of these states that are thinking about this and trying to get this right, what could you be doing? So these are just a couple of ideas to leave you with about how to actually break down those silos that exist. The first in Massachusetts actually has done this along with a number of other states. Actually just, this is a little jargony, but get your theory of action right. Like, in other words, have a conceptual way of talking about these reforms in a coordinated way so that then you can communicate that to people as a way of understanding how all this stuff that's seeming to be disconnected actually hangs together. Second, you've got to actually have those teams meet. This sounds almost ridiculous to say, but as you all know, this is actually really hard to do, to get people to meet on a regular basis, understand their agendas as connected, and do their work when they leave those meetings in ways that reinforce each other. So you've got to be co-developing plans and resources, and again, synchronize your timelines. That's just a huge thing, is getting the timing right within those agencies. And the last thing I'd leave with, again, this notion of communication. Once you've got all that, you've got a timeline, you can talk about this in a coherent way, you've got to figure out this communication conundrum. It's hard to do, right? This is a complex system. But you've got to streamline the number of messengers, the frequency of the communications. You've got to talk about this stuff with similar language. You've got to, don't send out different newsletters from different offices. That's not how people in the field see it, right? So just get it all together into one, and then have it all be connected so that when the teacher or principal gets it, they say, oh, okay, I see how all of this stuff that keeps coming at me actually hangs together. And a last point on that is that there's breakdowns that often happen, even when you get the messaging right, when people don't have clear roles and responsibilities about who's actually communicating to who and when. So be really diligent about kind of who the points of contact are in that communication chain, if you will, between the states, the districts, all of the schools. If there's a regional service delivery arm in there somewhere, figure out how all of that is supposed to move and communicate so that you don't have the breakdowns that often happen when you don't have that kind of clarity about who's doing what and communicating all of this in the coherent way that I'm suggesting needs to happen. That is that.
Great.
Thank you.
So my name is Sarah Barzey. I am the Chief Talent Officer at the Connecticut State Department of Education, and the way we're structured, and the Talent Office, like many of your states, is a new system and structure in our Department of Ed. There was no such thing as a Talent Office, and quite frankly, probably not a real diligent effort at human capital development, professional capital development, certainly not in a coordinated effort on a continuum from how we recruit the right people, high potential people into our so important profession of education, prepare them well and rigorously, induct them through a soft landing into the profession through what I know in Connecticut we're very proud of our 2-year induction program, so that we provide that soft landing for teachers into the field. And then we go over into my other bureau. So one bureau is the Bureau of Educator Standards and Certification, and the other is the very newly created even as of this year, the Bureau of Educator Effectiveness and Professional Learning. So that continues our continuum on the whole human capital, professional capital into professional practice. Once we believe that we've inducted and supported early career teachers into the career in a supportive way, that support typically, and I think Lisa alluded to it, oftentimes dissipates. It goes away, and it clearly is not equal and equitable across systems, across schools, across districts. Our goal, we hope, through educator evaluation, is not only to provide a way for us to have a fair and accurate way to measure performance, but more importantly, to build the capacity of our teachers and our school leaders for instruction and instructional leadership. So our performance management system has to be about both of those very important purposes. And then how do we keep teachers in the profession through career ladders and lattices that we haven't necessarily provided previously? Teacher leadership roles that look different, hybrid roles that look different, all of those areas that we're continuing to, or newly exploring and looking for new opportunities in the field. So that represents the Talent Office in 2 bureaus. When Megan asked me to speak about coherence today, part of me said, oh my gosh, if I had a dream job, it would be to be the coherence maker. And so our commissioner, whenever he's out publicly, if I'm in the room, he says, and Dr. Barzey is always harping on coherence. I don't call it harping. I think it's very important. I am like a fish swimming upstream in the department because I'm constantly saying, but this is great work, and Lisa referred to silos, and we always hear it as silos, and recently I heard it referred to differently, and I like it, cylinders of excellence, because excellent work, silos almost is pejorative, and cylinders of excellence really says, they're doing great work in the academic office. I absolutely know they are very capable, smart people, and the work that's coming out of there is excellent. Of course I know in the talent office everything that we're doing is wonderful, and it's a cylinder of excellence or approaching cylinder of excellence. And in our performance office and in our turnaround office, and that happens to be the 4 big offices in our department right now. But those of you who out there who are in SEAs know that unless we bring that work together, we are like running on treadmills, doing great work in our cylinders of excellence, but what we're doing is creating disruption. Disruptive innovation, yes, but we want it to be disruptive innovation, not disruption, not disruptive reform. So when Megan asked me, I said, gosh, I hope they don't think we're the example of coherence, because we're far from that, and I don't think we at the Connecticut State Department of Education are unique in our lack of coherence and the fact that just structurally and organizationally, until we create systems that are organizationally coherent, I think we'll continue to struggle with. And as Lisa said, I was speaking with a colleague at UConn this morning and saying, the consistency of messaging, and I'll get to that, was a perfect segue to my messages. We have so many messengers out there, and in our case, we have regional education service centers who are our intermediary. So it's critical that from the SEA and the through line through our intermediaries to the people on the ground level, if they're getting inconsistent messages, and it's funny because your last slide could be all of our current challenges, Lisa, we have this wonderful talent office newsletter now, and academic has a wonderful newsletter, and the turnaround office. So we go to regional superintendent meetings often, the commissioner, myself, and the academic officer, and the feedback we keep getting is, we've never had more and better communication from the State Department of Ed. Thank you. And the other side of them says, oh my gosh, it is too much communication all at once, you're not coordinating, it's all wonderful, but you're driving us crazy. Could you talk to each other in the department? So we're struggling. So if I had a dream job, I had a former colleague, previously I was at our State Education Resource Center, worked very closely with the SEA, and one of the former bureau chiefs said, Sarah, you have this amazing ability to see the big picture. And I like to think I have some ability. I actually call it opportunity, though, because at that time, I happened to have the opportunity to be in all of the places where people were talking about all of the initiatives that were happening. So while other people don't have that luxury, because you're in the data meeting, and they're in the standards meeting, and they're in the curriculum meeting, and they're in the eval meeting, I had this great opportunity in my role. At that time, I was an associate director of our State Education Resource Center. So I'm going to all the meetings, and I'm sitting there saying, I wonder if they know that they're talking about the same thing over there in a slightly different way. I should connect them. And I've also been called a connector. People who have read Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point, they say, gosh, you're such a connector. If that's my claim to fame, is I can just connect people and say they're doing good work and you're doing good work and you should work together, I would be happy. So we are not coherent in Connecticut right now. Don't say that on the video. But my goal is that we will strive for and continue, and I will die trying to create the coherence that unless we get it right at the SEA level and flow that through our intermediate units and all of the partners. I sat with Megan earlier and said, let me list all the partners we're working with in Connecticut. And I love to work with external partners because it's how we get fed new knowledge, new information, new expertise, and absolutely a national perspective. And at the same time, a former boss of mine said, it's like the buffet table. Everything looks really good until you consume it, and after you say, oh my gosh. We are currently working with, and I looked at the list, all of our RESs, our Association of Principals, our Association of School Superintendents, our Association of Boards of Ed, Achieve, TNTP, Center on Great Teachers and Leaders, CCSSO, Gates Cross-State Learning, and all of it has been amazing as cylinders, but until we cohere it, we don't even know how to make sense of it, and we have to be the sense makers for our districts. So we might have aligned on this because while Lisa was talking and we didn't have the opportunity to spend a lot of time in planning, I said, wow, interesting. So I decided to start with, why am I such a harper on coherence? Why does it matter, and does it matter? And so we all know that systems change is complex, but I'm not sure that there's a recognition, and this is not meant to be an all accusatory toward our policymakers, but the recognition that any one of the systems change that we've embarked upon in the last few years, let's just call it 2010 when Common Core hit, would have been monumental as a systems change effort. And in fact, we arguably have at least three. If we just say it's our standards, it's our performance evaluation systems, educator effectiveness work even larger than that, and then our new ways of assessing. Forgetting all of the wraparound, turnaround, I'm just talking the big three, if you will. Any one of those as a complex systems change process would have been tough to chew at the state level, at the intermediate level, and absolutely at the school and district level. So one could say, well, I wish they came, and I heard Lisa say it, staged and sequenced, and sometimes I say that, oh, wouldn't it have been easier if they said, let's do this, and then we'll do this. And some days I say that was the right way to roll it out, and other days I say it's like a puzzle, and if I have all of the puzzle pieces, somebody just help me put it together, and it will all make sense if I can see the gestalt. curriculum has to align with assessment. So maybe staging it isn't the right answer. I'm not sure. What I might be sure of is that perhaps we had to get that foundation set before we judge teacher effectiveness on a whole new world, but we'll leave that for another day. So systems change is complex, and we have to recognize that. We all in our cylinders of excellence think, well, it's really easy, I'm just asking you to do this. Yep, but there's 39 other people who are asking me to do different parts of the, and levers. We all know the vernacular, right? There's levers being pulled all over the place, not necessarily in unison and in sync. It's nonlinear, and so we have to acknowledge, and I think Lisa said it, we have to say it out loud and acknowledge that this is hard work. It's not going to be easy. It's not linear. It's messy. If you read Margaret Wheatley, she talks about quantum physics and the fractals and so on. It wasn't ever, no one ever said that the change process was going to be easy. But coherence is part and parcel of the complexity. I'm a big Fullen fan, and you'll see that through this, of that complexity. And he says, and when Megan was in Connecticut last week, I started the session, she probably fell on the floor, by saying, perhaps it never really can be achieved. And then Fullen talks about later, I don't know if I put it in here, we also have to be careful of coherence, because when we're in this moment when it's not coherent, it's when we're in that moment of that disruptive innovation where we're creating that place, that disequilibrium that none of us likes. It doesn't feel comfortable and good, but it's when growth and change is most likely to occur. So he talks about don't go too far toward coherence, because when you do, things get so stable, if you will, that we may lose innovation. So the fourth bullet is just so important to me. We can either support or we can hinder implementation, and I heard Lisa say it. It is all about the implementation. We can theorize, and I also have theory of action in here, because I think it's critical that we have some theory that we're driving toward, but all the theory in the world is not going to get us anywhere if we do not have a very solid understanding of implementation. How does it work, and just the messiness of it. So needing to explore, locate, and really you can't do this without communicating and coordinating. Where are those interdependencies between the initiatives? They exist. We seized on an opportunity, and it was actually Diana Roberts-Wenzel, our academic officer, and I pushed against it, and our commissioner pushed back at us and said, we need coherence between Common Core and eval. And I said, it is not. And so he wanted us to put into our Common Core teaching, which is one of our options for observation of practice and performance in our evaluation system. I want you to embed Common Core throughout. And I said, I don't think we're ready to do that yet, because we're going to be evaluating teachers on something they're not ready for yet, how unfair that is. And he said, no, if we don't put it in there, and that's our vision, and that's our outcome, we'll never get there. Well, he won. He did say, oh, he's the commissioner, he gets to win. But his vision was, Sarah and Diana, you're missing this opportunity to locate this interdependency between Common Core and educator evaluation that we have to put out there and make sense of. And we also have to acknowledge that it is scary, because we're going to evaluate you through a lens that perhaps is something they're not yet proficient in the instructional shifts that they're being asked to do. But we're going to have to be, thankfully we have a piece in professional judgment that will allow us to say, here's where we're going, and we know you're not yet there in our observation rubric. But if we didn't put it in there, Diana and I would still be like this in the academic and the talent office. I'd have to move forward, so I don't. So challenges, I think we've talked, I think I've already gotten to some of these. The confluence of new initiatives simultaneously and all moving quickly. Michael Fullen says, when change is rapid, learning has to be slow. People only have so much ability to truly learn and absorb so much information. We can throw a lot at them, but we know that they only have the ability to absorb so much. We're not necessarily in that zone of possible development, if you will, but that's what we have, so we have to work with it. The third piece is my most frustrating piece, because I heard Lisa say it. I am If coherence is my job, collaboration is my love. I love to collaborate. We do not have time right now to get in those rooms and to be able to have time internally in the department, and as importantly, probably most importantly, to clean our own closet first. But then with all of those partners I listed, the external coherence is so important, and we just don't have the time to sit and look for those interdependencies and those connections. So it's a challenge, and it's the same challenge that those in districts say, you want us to come together in a new vision of professional learning that's job embedded, that's just happening at the school level, less stand and deliver. We need to restructure if we are going to change practices. We cannot put new practices in old systems and structures and just think they're going to work. That's part of the complexity of this system change that says you've got to have a theory of action or philosophy, you've got to have enabling or disabling policy, then you've got to have structures and supports, and then you have the practices that you're trying to lift and move. I've already talked about silos of excellence. So these are, and I'm going to quickly go through them. I think you'll see that Lisa and I perhaps live in the same brain, because the foundations for creating them, these come from bits of pieces of research, but this is literally me sitting at my computer and saying, here's what I think we need to make this work. If I were making my pitch to the commissioner, we need a vision. We need to know where it is that we want to be that's different than our current reality. And we need to be clear about that, and we need to communicate that. In our department, we sometimes say at our senior leadership, we need to communicate it among ourselves before we can communicate it out there. Clear outcomes. If we don't know where we're going, we are likely not going to get there, so the outcomes have to be clear. A theory of action, Lisa already said. An understanding of systems change. If you don't understand the complexities, the fact that it takes time, and we don't expect that we can do it in a year or 2 years, we are not going to be able to be successful in our efforts. Any organizing framework. I put two that I particularly like. I just spoke of one. Another is Ambrose's Managing Complex Change. It could be Harvard's PELP framework. You name it. The frameworks are out there. Pick a framework that helps you organize the work. Shared vision, purpose, goals, and values. If you don't value coherence, you probably aren't going to put your time into the communication and collaboration that you need to get coherence. It's not going to be where you spend your time and energy. So value coherence and value collaboration. Focus. I said before, a former boss of mine said, the buffet table. We have so many opportunities right now, and they're great opportunities to partner with partners, to get expertise. We have to look at how much we can do and how much lack of focus is going to derail our efforts. Time and then timing. There is a time, as I said, when coherence might be a bad thing because it could squelch innovation and creativity. There's another time when we have all that innovative stuff out there, and we've got to now start putting that puzzle together in a coherent way. So I'm going to stop because I know I have lots more, and I'm not going to try to go through this because it really doesn't matter what we're doing. I want to get to the most important thing, which is our opportunity to, so let me finish with final thoughts, and then I'll segue into Megan's, because I think it has such power. I want to make sure she has time for it. Timing does matter. We have the timing that we have right now. We have the staging and the sequence. We have to make it work with what we have in front of us. And I like Lisa's point about we need to adjust now. We need to not throw this away because there's too much good thinking and good work on the table. It just needs us to massage it and play with it a little bit to get it right. It is hard work. It's messy. We have to keep at it. We cannot abandon. And I'm going to intro Megan's session by saying that we had the great opportunity to have Megan and Lauren in state 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. And initially I said, let's just do it internally in the department. And then I took the risk and said, no, we cannot do it only in the department because those intermediaries that are out there communicating on our behalf, doing technical assistance on our behalf, they've got to be consistent messengers of our vision, of our theory, of our messaging. So we've got to be able to expose all of our warts and all of our issues right there with them and work through the messiness. So we brought all of the parties together to do the coherence activity that Megan's going to work through. The value that I think Megan Lauren, GTL Center's process is this process that she's going to walk you through is a bottom-up coherence making process while I'm working on trying to do some policy level, top-down, macro level things. One of the things I would have shared if I had time is our big new vision for professional learning guidance. That's a guidance document. It really sets forth a vision, but it's pretty ethereal and pretty high level. It is not operational and pragmatic enough for a school to say, how do I do it, Sarah? It's all about what we think it should look like. Megan's process that you're going to walk through now, I believe at the district level with our top-down and their bottom-up process that we experienced 2 weeks ago, I do believe it has a value for people to see the connection between the Common Core standards, the instructional shifts or the SIPs, and then how do we effectively target and focus professional learning. Where are the gaps that help teachers change their practice such that our evaluation system is truly about building instructional capacity in teachers and leaders? And I think this process that you're going to walk through. So I'm putting my bet on all of my efforts to do all of this bigger coherence making, collaboration, and so on. And the tools and the processes, and for me, the value of what you're going to walk through next is truly, it's a tool and process that facilitates coherence that all of that, this level stuff is not going to get us to. So I'm going to stop, turn it over to Megan, and be available for questions after. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As Sarah alluded, I work with the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders at American Institutes for Research, and we are a national, federally funded, some people call us free, we like to call ourselves prepaid technical assistants that we work with SEAs and LEAs to support all kinds of things around educator quality topics. And we this topic has sort of surfaced as in our work across states. Folks have really been talking about this and thinking about this and trying to figure this out. And so I will tell you this, I don't have a silver bullet, I don't have a solution, so if you were looking for one today, you're probably not going to leave here with one. But what we were able to do is to devise a process that helps folks kind of walk through this, and to Sarah's point, kind of at the bottom, to bring up the bottom and have the top meet so that there's some thinking, some similar thinking going on and some work going on. So I'm going to talk a little bit through that process in a minute. How many of you, I'm just kind of curious who's in the room, how many of you think about where you work, how many of you work at the SEA level or the state level? Okay, great. And how about at the regional level? Okay, couple, good. And district level? So we've got almost 50-50 kind of, so excellent, great. So the GTL Center really does work at the SEA and LEA level and provide support for states. And we have lots and lots of resources I'll tell you about our website towards the end of this presentation, but our goal is to help build capacity at the state level so that the work can filter down to districts and making sure that districts are feeling, they're not going, wait, I have 10 newsletters here from the state, which one do I focus on, right? But so that they're really seeing the cohesion that comes down from folks. So we're really focused on providing technical assistance and guidance to folks. We do a lot of policy scans. We offer a lot of resources and research on topics around educator quality. So if you haven't seen our website or know a lot about us, it's super helpful. The work we do is with the state and local level, but regional level, but the resources on the website are really targeted for anybody, information that could be useful. I previously worked in the Chicago Public Schools, and when we were building the teacher evaluation system there, we wanted to know what everybody else was doing in states or in other districts. So it was a great resource to kind of reference to find out that information as you think through different policies and as you're designing systems for that. So to Lisa's point, it's so interesting that she's talking kind of this idea of making sure that we're making smart adjustments. So thinking about everybody's at a different place, right? Some folks are a couple years into implementation around teacher evaluation. Some folks are just starting. Some people haven't even started designing their systems. There's all kinds of things. At the same time, in those systems, we have different observation tools and rubrics kind of across the country. Everybody's got different ones that they're using. There are a few that kind of rise to the top, Marzano, Danielson, Class, etc. But that for the most part, there's really not a ton of consistency across the country on that. So one of the things that we wanted to do is kind of find something that did, from a national level, speak at a national level. And that was really where we came in with the Common Core, thinking about how can we make this a little bit more practical for folks. How can we help people kind of think about it? Everybody's saying they're implementing it, as Lisa said, they're talking about it, but what it really looks like is kind of a mystery, at least from our perspective. And so we really wanted to bring those pieces together, and of course that's all built on the idea of professional learning. But one thing that's really important, and I mean it was great, I think it was Lisa's fourth bullet on her PowerPoint, she talked about this idea of engaging stakeholders, that this process was built as a shared journey, that the process itself, the journey itself, is just as important as the destination. And it's really built for educators, folks on the ground, to do this work. It can be used, as Sarah referenced, at the state level to help state folks kind of align across their work, but this is really geared towards district level educators. This process is really useful because it helps them make the connections and start grappling with some of the questions and identifying a common language as they talk about Common Core moving forward. So I just want to tell you a little bit about something we call core instructional practices. So there's a couple of different organizations that you may know about that essentially what American Institutes for Research did as we were kind of drafting this work is we created a set of core instructional practices that come right out of the Common Core state standards. We have 10 for ELA literacy and 10 for mathematics. And they were really, their purpose is very, very specific, and it is just for systems alignment work. These are not supposed to be a set of standards you go into a classroom and you observe and you check off. That is not the purpose, because we know people will throw darts at us because there's another set of things for them to do. That's not the purpose. It's really to ground everybody in this process in a common language and common understanding. And so just to be super clear about that, that is really the focus of the core instructional practices. Now, when we were in Connecticut, Connecticut has been really active in getting folks around, understanding the instructional shifts. And so when we presented the SIPs to everybody, they were sort of like, oh, so this is sort of the how, the shifts are the what, and this is sort of the how. So that's sort of one way you might want to think about it. But really, they are content specific, although in a minute you'll get a chance to dig into them and kind of look for yourself. But there are also some that are more generic. So think about it. Classroom observation tools are generic in nature, right? We don't have one for every subject area and every grade level. Boy, that would be really a lot of work if we did. So it's generic on purpose. This really helps bring in the content specificity that's needed and the language that's needed to really clearly articulate some of the general statements that are in our observation rubrics. We drafted them at AIR with our content experts that we have in-house, and then we sent them out into the field. We had folks, content experts, teachers, administrators, all kinds of folks in the field have a look and kind of provide some feedback and finalize them so that we could move forward with this particular work. But if on your tables you all have a little booklet that looks like this, Creating Coherence. This is a special issues brief. It was a pre-reading in the guidebook, so if you happen to have a look at it. But this particular document, if you look at, I believe it is page 9. Yep. If you turn into page 9, you will be able to see the core instructional practices. This brief sort of set the tone for this entire professional learning module. And so what we do is we go, and what we did with Sarah is group is we go out and we walk folks through this process. So the process kind of came out of this particular brief, and it's a 4-step process that I'm going to walk you through in a minute. But just want to take 2 minutes or so and have a look, just kind of skim through the core instructional practices, page 9 through page 11, and just kind of think, are there any general things that jump out at you as you're reading? So just take a few minutes to do that. So any thoughts jump out at you? Remember, the purpose of these is not another set of standards to be using to help teachers, right? But this is really for alignment work. Do these capture some of the words and the shifts that folks are talking about? I mean, it helps, I think, clarify to some degree some of that work. We referenced the in-task standards, the progressions and the in-task standards. We looked at the student achievement partners. They have a similar set of these. And we really just wanted to make sure that we were providing the nuance, specificity that's needed to kind of help understand what this looks like in practice. So essentially, we are asked by states and regional education organizations to come and help them kind of walk them through this particular process. So we use these as kind of our common definition as we go through the process with states. And in Connecticut, they're using the shifts. That was really their piece. So we tried to make sure we customized it so it was really specific to Connecticut and made connections for them. So they were able to go ahead and align the instructional shifts, and they could go ahead and draw the lines between what instructional shifts and the core instructional practices to help them really look at. It's almost the operationalization of the instructional shifts, and I think that was kind of an aha moment for some of the folks in the room when we did that particular work. How many of you are using the shifts as sort of your, in your states or districts? How many of you are using shifts as sort of the crux to get the Common Core implemented out in districts? Yeah, a couple folks? Familiar, sort of, yeah. I think we all know that there's everybody's talking about the shifts, but everybody's I'm not really sure what the shifts are, right? So I think it was something that came out in 2010 when Common Core came out, and everybody's been kind of trying to catch up and figure out what that looks like. So just wanted you to have a chance to look into those for a minute. As I go through this, and we'll have a chance to keep digging in, there's a 4-step, the process really can be summarized in 4 steps. And the session that we usually facilitate is a day-long session. There's enough content in the session to kind of present or to have groups working for an entire day. You're getting a very, very abbreviated version of that. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the steps, and I'm going to ask Sarah if she's got any insights that she wants to jump in and share. That we'll do that. And I will also tell you a little bit about the states, the work I've done in other states around what they've done with this and what kind of the outcomes of the sessions, if you're curious about that, as we wrap up. So the brief is sort of a good example of this. You kind of get the sense of everything in the brief, so feel free to take a copy if you would like, and when you have spare time, if you want to kind of poke around in there. But essentially, this is all in the brief, so you can also consider yourself read once you've gone through this. So the first step is to identify the instructional practices that support the Common Core State Standards implementation. So in this case, you may bring together a group that are ELA experts and mathematics experts, and they may decide, okay, we're going to tackle just the ELA ones, and we're going to tackle just the math ones, right? Or you could have generalists come together, and they could go ahead and tackle all 20 of the core instructional practices. I mean, it's just the purpose of what is the vision and the goal and the priorities of your particular district or state, and helps really focus in on that. So I'll talk about this in a minute, but in Rhode Island, they're really trying to identify high leverage practices in their rubric that they're using there, and so they use the core instructional practices to help them identify those practices so that they could really have a focus as they're talking to districts, saying, we have 22 standards in our observation framework. We can't do all of this. So helping folks kind of parse it out and chunk it out so that they can roll it out and phase it in over time. So that was one of the another use for this particular piece. But identifying the practices that are really going to support that piece. So if you would indulge me for a minute, go back to and look through your core instructional practices on page 9, or you could use handout number 1, whichever one. But take a minute to kind of identify a few core instructional practices, and you can pick if you want to do mathematics or ELA, but identify a few that are more generic in nature that you think you could use with all teachers, because we want to remember that a lot of times when we talk about Common Core, teachers who don't teach ELA or math kind of stop listening because they think it doesn't really apply to them, right? So we want to start engaging, we want to start making this about all teachers, not just about the folks who whose students are going to be taking those tests, but that really the practices are generic enough in some aspects that can apply to lots of different teachers and different settings, grade levels, and so forth. So just take a few minutes and identify one or two practices that you think are generic enough to be across all teachers and grade levels. There's a lot of talk about Common Core and the shifts all the time, but I think when you think about, like, well, what would I see when I'm in a classroom? People are a little bit more stumped on the answer to that question. While these aren't, a complete set of everything you should be seeing, they, I think, lend a little bit of a glance into, oh, that's what it might look like or sound like. There's still obviously strategies that need to be attached to these pieces, right? And you need to get folks to them, like, how do I do that? And pedagogical approaches, but I think that this helps break it down even more. It's helping take the genericness out of the observation tool and really put it into the practices that should be happening in classrooms. So that's really the use here for this particular piece. Any other thoughts that came to mind as you were reviewing these?
I would just add one. I feel like I'm focusing on the math side of it, and it's just really good practice. And I think this has been really good practice in math for a very long time. So that's also, I think, comforting too. This is not a huge change in what we think of as really excellent math teaching.
So you bring up a really good point. One of the reasons why we don't call them shifts is because it sort of implies that people haven't been doing it and that everybody has to change. And I think we wanted to be really clear that we know this has been going on in pockets maybe and not kind of consistently, but we don't want to assume that this hasn't been going on. We think that that's absolutely right. This is not about reinventing anything. It's helping to help folks see those connections, like, oh, I already do this. There's lots of discourse happening in my classroom all the time. I'm always asking higher level questions. That we don't make an assumption that no one's doing this and, oh my goodness, this is a huge lift. Don't get me wrong, there are places where this is a huge lift, but I think we don't want to necessarily make that assumption about everywhere as we talk about this work. So it was a good point to bring up. So the way this works is then, so we spend some time during the professional learning module kind of walking people through this. We have people kind of construct their knowledge and think about this. And once they have decided which instructional practices they're going to use, then we have them look through sorry, let me pull up in my pile of, we have a workbook. All of the stuff is online. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But we have a workbook, which you don't have at your table, but you have a page from the workbook at your table. So the slides that I have on your table, in the back of them, you'll see two handouts. The first handout is the core instructional practices, and the second handout is actually just a page from the workbook, just so you could get a sense of it. The workbook is like 20-some pages long, so that's for the full day session. You guys get the real shortened version. But just to give you kind of a taste of what this is like and what this process looks like, we wanted to give you an opportunity to try this out. So once you kind of identify the core instructional practices, and we have taken the liberty to do that for you for the purposes of this presentation, so you will see that we have selected ELA 7, I believe, and Math 5, right? So we thought those were two pretty generic ones that could be transferred across all subject areas and content areas. So that's why we picked, really, the primary reason we picked those. But what we then have folks do is really take out their observational rubric, whatever it happens to be, so that we ask them to bring those tools with them to the session. And some of you may have it available electronically. If you are interested in using yours, you're welcome to pull those up. You may even have it in your bag somewhere. Who knows? You may also have it right here in your head, because sometimes some of you may be really engaged in that, and that's fine. However you want to do this, we have also put, just in case you don't have it at the tip of your fingers, we have put the Connecticut core teaching practices, a page front and back, we put their two of their indicators, 3A and 3B. There were only 2 copies per table, so you will have to share, which is exactly what we want you to do, because we want you to have some conversation about this. So if you don't have a rubric at your fingertips, you don't have your rubric at your fingertips, you can use that as an example. But we want you to really dig in and think about, and I'll show you an example here in a minute. We did an example here, but think about what are the explicit connections that you see in the observation tool for the core instructional practice that is listed on the paper on the handout that we have for you, right? So start with ELA LSIP 7 and look through the rubric, either the one you have, your own rubric, or the one we provided for you, and think about what are the explicit connections and what are the implicit connections. Don't worry about the last column. We'll get there in a minute. Focus really on the language. What language do you see that's explicit and implicit in the rubric that you're going to be focusing on? So just take a few minutes, use handout 2, use either the Connecticut rubric or your own, and please do this in table groups or in pairs or however. Have a conversation. That's the point of this particular process. So please do that. We'll take about 5 minutes or so. I was talking to a table and they were asking about, well, how do you get everybody on the same page about it? So you've got, a group of people together, so how would I know that this table up here and the table in the very back are thinking the same thing? I mean, that's all the facilitation of it, right? That's all in this, like, let's stop, let's regroup, let's talk about it. Let's see, what did we come up with? Why did you say that? I don't know, why did you say that? And having people talk about this and think about it. It's a long process, it takes time, and it's not a clean, like I said, it's not a silver bullet. It's a process to really help people start talking about this. But one thing I will say, as another conversation at a table I was talking about, is once the alignment is there and you have the data from teacher observations, you can then start thinking about, from a professional learning perspective, what it is that we're really focusing on. So you're seeing the scores, right? You see the distribution of ratings and you're saying, ooh, our teachers perform a lot lower on, this standard. Look at the instructional practice that's associated with that. Aha, this is where I'm going to prioritize my professional learning, or this is how I'm going to build professional learning around that particular piece. So you can then go backwards. Once you've aligned it forward, you can then use the data and go backwards to help identify and be more specific and targeted in your professional learning supports for teachers, which is really, isn't that why we have done this reform of teacher evaluation? So it's amazing. It kind of is like, oh, right, there it is. And so it really helps kind of pull that those pieces together. So I know that wasn't a lot of time. I'm sorry to kind of rush you through this. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of what this looks like, and I'll tell you where you can find all those materials. I'll have my email address and the website address, so you can look at all of this stuff and follow up as necessary if you think you are interested in thinking about this or customizing this for your own context. But just to kind of keep us going here, so we only have a few more minutes. 1 minute. Oh, how about that? We've got 1 minute. So one of the things as you do this and as you go through each core instructional practices, gaps start emerging. You start seeing like, oh, wow, we thought we had all this stuff in here about questioning. We sure don't. Or we thought we had vocabulary covered in here, but really it's only in this one place, right? So gaps start emerging, but also connections and alignment starts emerging. And that is so reaffirming, right? And makes people feel like, look at this, we're not totally off here. It is there. We have to help people, and that's why having folks on the ground do this work, because it's helping them see it instead of telling them it is. It's like, oh yeah, here it is. I see the connection now. So that's really helpful for them. We do the same process for the professional learning. So that third column on that workbook page, right here, professional learning initiatives, offerings, programs, we have the same thing. You go through and you think through what are some of the direct supports that you have available. And again, gaps emerge, connections are there, and you can start thinking a bit beyond what do we have on a website for people to access versus what am I doing that's job embedded for people? How is coaching and feedback embedded into the core instructional practices and the feedback, the post-observation conferences that I'm hosting as part of the teacher evaluation, right? It's not disconnected, they're the same thing. So helping people with that. And then the very last step is really just they have time to action plan. They find a gap, they pick one they want to focus on, and they really start thinking through what it is that they want to be doing and to help kind of close that gap or fill that gap and move forward. And in some places, and I'll just go real quickly through these three states and one district that we've worked with. There are a few others, but just for your own information, they really picked, this isn't about redoing. It's what Lisa said, it's the right adjustments. It's figuring out where are there misalignments, where are those gaps, and figuring out how do we adjust as a result. We want educators to be on a continuous cycle of improvement. This is the same kind of approach. It's identifying those pieces and helping put it all together and adjusting as going forward here. So Idaho, we had brought together, the one difference in Idaho and with others is that they had their educator prep programs there, which you should have seen their faces when we showed them this. They were like, oh. So it was a real eye-opener for them. But that was, I mean, certainly a really interesting work session. But how are we creating coherence, not just in our little worlds, but how is the talent office reaching out to the educator prep programs? I mean, Sarah had folks from the university at the coherence session. So it's not just about what's happening in your little shop, but who are these other people that we can bring together? And then Ray Giamartino is in the back. Sorry, I'm going to call you out. I hope you don't mind. But Ray went through this process with us in September when we were at a conference together, and he has built a whole system of professional learning around the work. I mean, not that it's completely associated with what we did, but he really a light bulb went off for him and helped him build through that. So if you want to talk to Ray, Ray's back there. You can raise your hand, Ray, so everybody knows you're there. You go, yay! So no. Sorry, but in Rochester City Schools, he's really done an amazing job using this work. And I had followed up with Ray, and I was like, hey, what's going on with your creating coherence? He's like, oh, that thing's been sitting on my table. I was like, oh, right, of course. But he didn't mean sitting on his table not doing it. It's sitting on his table because he's always looking at it. And I was like, oh, right, that's great. So it's really exciting when you follow up with folks. So I know, sorry. I'm totally dumb. Here's the brief. You already saw that. You've got a copy of it. There it is. That's where the brief is found. You can also find the entire day-long professional learning. There's slides, facilitators agenda, a workbook, materials, resources for this, and there's also a sheet on your tables that tells I tried to take that with me. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah. This right here, we have 3 other professional learning modules on there, and we're building more, so there's more information and resources on our website for you. And we're all prepaid, so good for you. You can customize and use it all you want. But I really want to, and there's my email address, I really want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions of not just me, but of Lisa and Sarah about this work.
So I can't speak as articulately to the Common Core shifts, but I will say that I was just leaning over to Lisa with respect to what are the look-fors that we're going to focus on, at least early on. As I said, our Chief Academic Officer and I pushed back against the Commissioner initially because our concern was it is different, perhaps not so different. To Megan's point, the shifts make it sound like this is just a whole new revolutionary way of doing things, and that's not necessarily true, right? Good teaching has always been good teaching. We're trying to move the dial a little bit. But in our observation framework, one of the things we're talking about, and the gentleman who spoke about Rhode Island do all of the following. One of the things we're talking about for when you observe a teacher's practice is it's a lot and it's overwhelming for teachers and administrators, quite frankly, who are observing them to think that in a rubric they've got to see 47 things. So we tried to make our rubrics more streamlined, and then those Common Core shifts, I believe we are going to give some autonomy to districts in their observation of practice to say, you don't have to have evidence for every single domain and indicator in each of the strands. You could actually power some of the indicators. So I could say, I'm going to ask you to focus on this SIP or this instructional shift. And when you set your SLOs or your objectives, we're going to really focus at an individual or a team or a grade level or a school or a district on some pieces of this, because I just think the ability to learn all of this and assume that you're going to be able to be evaluated on it. And let's face it, people are concerned about, am I going to be proficient or exemplary? When it's, in some cases, even though that's not all new, there are some changes that are occurring. So we'd like to be able to take our rubric and give districts autonomy to say, if you think you want to see everything, that's fine. If I was sharing with Lisa, one superintendent who I have huge confidences in as an instructional leader, they are choosing to truly power and say, it is all about everybody on the grade level understanding questioning techniques. So we're going to just really power that, and we're going to focus on that. And then they can align their professional learning, and so we're playing with that right now, which we think will make it a little less anxiety producing and a little more palatable to say, I can just focus on getting really good at that. And look, we can't take 10 years to say, okay, 3A for a year, 2B for, but we do have to acknowledge, as Lisa said earlier, it is a lot, and we have to look for some strategies to be able to streamline and make it manageable for teachers. So I don't know if that answers your question, but from the talent point of view and the evaluation point of view, we think that's one way that we can support the new learning that Common Core requires while also doing the evaluation work.
And they're pushing everything back 15 minutes, so I don't want you to think you're not going to get your break. So the next session will start until 3:15, so we do have time for another couple of questions. Is that me?
Yeah, my name is Nate Schwartz. I work with the Tennessee Department of Education. And so I'm curious that both Lisa and Sarah talked about theories of action and how important it was to have one. And I'm a big believer in that, but I actually don't know what I mean when I say that. Can you talk about what you actually mean by theory of action?
Go ahead.
You can probably provide a concrete example, though. You have one, right?
No, I can tell you that's one of the things that at least two of us are. Are we still videotaping? We are. Yeah. That is one of the things that I think is pretty critical. What are we driving toward? What is our theory of change? If this, then that, right? So if you've actually written a theory of action, you actually do some hypothesis statements. So if we do this, then this will happen. And in the absence of that, then we're really just trial and error in no man's land, right? So I'm going to carefully say some of us in our department feel like we are absent. We clearly in our turnaround office, there's a pretty well-defined theory of action, but I think we need a global department-wide to facilitate coherence. If we do this, then that will happen. And I think in the absence of that, we are going to be floundering a little bit until we can splash that theory of action on paper, and districts are asking us in our superintendent prep program that I went through in Connecticut. Theory of action is a big thing, so superintendents out there know that we need a theory of action, and in the absence of that, they're saying, well, what is your theory department? What are you striving for? So for me, a theory of action is a series of statements that say, if we do this, this will happen, and these are the outcomes we're driving for. We have a strategic plan. We have a vision statement, we have a mission statement, but we do not have if-then statements and then a series of strategies that we think are the strategies that'll get us to, if we do this, then that'll happen. So I say that a little bit cautiously because we should have a theory of action more explicitly stated that we could all speak out there in the field and people would be able to align to. So.
She said basically what I was going to say, which is that I think it's a combination of taking things that often exist in state and local offices, right? It's your overall mission and vision. What are you trying to achieve for kids, right? Start there, but then it's connecting the dots of all of the pieces that you have pushing out, if you will, in a way that is clearly connected to them. And those if-then statements that are part of that, this sort of classic strategic planning methodology are a very useful way to actually connect those, so it's not just let me just say, what I'm not suggesting is you say, this is our goals for kids, and then you put the teacher evaluation and Common Core and accountability and all of this, and you put a bunch of arrows. Like, that's not what I'm saying.
So we're in this meeting where we're talking about creating coherence between teacher evaluation and Common Core.
Right.
And
so one way to frame,
told us we need a theory of action.
right, so one way to frame this, and this is not an answer, I'm just giving this as an example to help make this concrete, because that's what I think we were fishing for, and I think all three of us sounded this to one degree or another, is this notion of of professional learning for teachers, right? That really what we're trying to do is get students to this level, and to have students get to this level, we need our teachers, right, to be at a level of competence. And our systems, if we build a teacher evaluation system that really is grounded in excellent instruction and has a way of gathering systematic information so that then it can go back and feed into our plans for professional development, they're going to get better and students are going to achieve, right? Common Core is the content, right, within that. You've got to align the rubrics so that when that piece is happening, right, so you're connecting the if-thens of what you're, of the sort of the stuff of the work that you're doing at the Tennessee Department of Ed, right, to that in a concrete way. So it's not a conceptual framework, right? It's not table 1 of your dissertation. It really is very concrete about these are the steps we will take, and this is how these big pieces fit together in an if-then connected way to get us ultimately to stronger teachers, higher achieving kids. And does that help? Okay.
I would be curious, are we alone in wishing we had a theory of action, or the other SEA people? Because clearly I'm looking for the if-then. If we build teacher capacity in instructional practices, students' achievement will follow. If we provide time for ongoing job-embedded professional learning for teachers, student outcomes will change, whatever. We don't have those. We have theories, we have strategies, but I'm looking for a tight set of if-thens, and I'd be curious if other departments are with us, or they are a little bit what we're saying. We have a mission statement, we have a vision statement, we have strategies, but lacking those tight set of if-thens. Are other states way there and have theories of action all well articulated?
I'll do the classic, I won't answer your question at all, I'll ask you a question instead.
Yeah.
I know the Connecticut department is good. You have smart people there. Why don't you have that? There's got to be a good reason organizationally why a department doesn't have it. I see all the great things Tennessee's doing, and I'm saying, okay, well, if this guy who's like super smart, who likes theories of action, but doesn't quite think he has one yet, there's got to be a real good organizational reason why. So I'd ask that to answer your question.
I have an answer. I'm not sure I'm going to answer it right now, but I do think it goes back to value and knowledge, right? So I know of theories of action because I happen to be exposed to them in a superintendent prep program that I said, oh my gosh, if I'm going to be a superintendent next week, I can't go in and just say, oh, I think we're going to do a few things. I have to go in with a tight set of, if I want this to happen, then I have to do this, and I have to set forth that vision, clearly articulate the outcomes, define some tight strategies, focus those strategies, and then I think we're going to get there. And then we're going to tweak and adjust along the way, right? So I'm a theory of action person because I've been exposed to that. I'm not the person who is in charge of doing that. I can just keep saying, look, I think we need a clearly stated theory of action. And I'm not saying that we're not doing good work. We absolutely are. But I do think there's some of us internally that as we continue toward continuous improvement, say, might we be more effective if we, I'm a big fan also of strategic abandonment. We can't do it all well. So we have got to look at, what are we doing? My superintendent internship, I had a great mentor who was a great model of that and would say, everybody comes in with great ideas and everything again on the buffet table looks enticing. She was the model of discipline in saying, here's our theory of action, and does it support our theory of action or not? It's not in our theory of action right now. We're not doing it. It's a great idea, but we're not doing it. And she's a high-performing district, not just because she happens to be a high-performing district for other reasons, but I believe it was her strategic focus and a clear theory of action followed by strategies and the ability to tweak along the way. That was just her leadership, right? You need the leadership to be able to believe that a theory of action will get you there, and so on. So